So when we last left off, we'd gotten to a stage where we were able to really start creating some actual models with the tools that we learned. Now, I know I passed this model along to all of you, and I know this is probably different from your site. This is one I did previously. Now, just so you know, before we jump into any of this, yours does not necessarily need to be this complicated in terms of like topography or anything like that. I mean, if the benches and light standards are kept really simple, as well as the building shapes, that's completely fine. This is just what I did, and this can maybe just be used as a little bit of a guide for measurements and that kind of thing, just to help you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover a couple things. We're going to look into essentially creating renders and shifting the lighting in the sun and all that. And we're also going to talk about creating using the make 2D function to create a 2D line essentially of our model in whatever viewport we're looking in. And we're also going to talk about viewports, which is very quick and easy as well. So we can get into this right now. Let's have a look at what we have. So when we scroll out here using our scroll wheel in the perspective view, we hold down the right cursor to cycle around. We can see this is great, but right now we're just in perspective. And I believe for this project, two of the views they call for are isometric views. Now this is very, very easy to change in Rhino, because all we're doing is we're just shifting the viewport a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our mouse with the perspective view selected, the 3D view. We're going to move up to View, select View, left click, and we're going to scroll down to Set View. And you can see we've got a whole bunch of options here, top, bottom, left, right, all these. We're going to go down to Isometric, and there's a few options here. Why don't we cycle through a couple of them and see how they look? Okay, so this is a northeast isometric view, where it would be to scale and even and isometric, just like it's supposed to be, but it's northeast. Now, not bad. That gives some interesting perspective of what's going on, but let's see what else we have here. We'll go back, we'll scroll into northwest. Now this one, that's a lot better, because that gives a fair bit of detail as to what's going on with the benches, this side of the building. This just gives a little context, and it will always look a little different for yours, but because everyone else is doing a different site. But you know, once your model is in place, it's really just about all about finding an isometric view that gives the most detail. So as you know, now you just go to View, Set View, Isometric, and you pick the one you like. Now, conversely, if you decide you want to go back to perspective view, that's very easy to do. You just cycle up to perspective, and as you can see, hold down the right shift key. Getting a lot of emails right now, sorry about that. As you can see, I flipped back to perspective very easily there. But for now, let's stick with the view we were just looking at, northwest. So now we've got a little bit of a sense of how to move around and set different views in Rhino. What we're going to talk about next is the process of creating renders. Now, you recall that for this project, the renders can be pretty simple. We're not going into a great deal of color or anything like that. It's really just to demarcate a little bit of shape and shadow. So here's what we're going to do first. We need to look into adjusting the lighting. Now to start with, let's see what we're working with at a baseline. Let's go over to parallel view here. We're going to right click. Now instead of shaded, which it currently is, we're going to go over to rendered. Oof, okay. So there's what we have for now. That's basically our model in a rendered shadow inclusive view. Now, let's have a look over at our, essentially we're going to look at two things sort of concurrently right now, and you're going to see why in a second. We're going to look at adjusting sunlight and that sort of thing, but we're also going to look at our rendering tool, a rendering tool that is kind of new in Rhino, but for the scope of this project, I think is going to be really quick and handy and very effective to use. So here's what we're going to do. And don't panic if it seems like I'm kind of jumping ahead a couple steps. I promise this will produce a good result that everyone should hopefully be happy with. What we're going to do is this. You see up here where we've got our standard view, or our standard tab, we're going to slide over to display. Select display. And as you can see also, I moved back to the shaded view here. I right clicked and moved over to shaded. So that's fine. It just gives us a good sense of essentially what we're dealing with right now. Now, here is what we are going to do right now. And again, don't panic if it seems like we're leaping ahead, having not talked about sun and lighting too much yet. We're going to move across these tools up here, these icons, and we're going to move to Raytrace, this orange sun here. Now the idea is this is going to, well, you'll see in a second, but this is just going to produce, for what we want out of this project, a pretty solid and pretty crisp little render, nice and quickly too. So let's see what we have here. Raytrace, we left click and have a look at that. Now, as you can see, it's solidifying kind of as we move along here, but this is working well. You know, this is for what we need. This works for producing a fairly decently crisp render. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. We just completely skipped over adjusting the sunlight. Maybe it's a different day or a different time. Don't panic, because thanks to what Raytrace can do, we're also going to look at adjusting the sun, and it's going to update live. So let's have a look. We're going to move over to the render tab up here. See? We're going to select. We're going to move down to panels. We're going to have a couple options in here: lights, sun, and ground plane. Let's have a look and see what selecting lights does. This is the thing we're going to do first. Now you've noticed here, I've got skylight deselected. Here's why. Because for this tool that we're using, you know, for when we're using Raytrace, if we turn the skylight on as well as the sun, here's what happens. There's way too much light all of a sudden. It totally obliterates everything we've just done. Now we don't want that, so we're going to deselect that for now. And then we have just our nice single sunlit model. But now we need to actually figure out how to adjust that sun a little bit, because right now it's just sort of at whatever default I had it at. That's not going to be a problem, because we're going to slide over to this tab here, sun, left click, and now we see we have the sun is on, which is good, but we've also got manual control on. Now, just for fun, let's go through manual control for a second, because sometimes you can produce a pretty nice render with just a nice altitude of 45 and azimuth of 45. So let's try it. When I go to 45 for this, you see it shifted it a little bit, but the idea is it's coming in at a really nice 45-degree angle. Now, if you don't feel like typing it, you can even adjust where the sun is located just by clicking, left clicking, and holding down that little essentially ball icon that's on the sun's position. So we can really customize it to wherever we want the sun's position to be. Whoa, see? Now it's kind of going later in the day. A little dark. That might be good if we wanted to produce a bit of an evening shot or something like that, or add some extra detail to what might be going on for the people sitting down here. But for now, let's just say we were happy with 45 and 45 for azimuth and altitude. Great. But that's all with manual control. And I know that in a lot of cases, if maybe you're working for a firm or you're doing some sort of a project that involves a really specific date and time or location, we can do that very easily too. And here's how we're going to do it. We move over to manual control. We're going to deselect it. And now, look at all this new information that just popped up. All this stuff. Essentially, this lets us fine-tune it to wherever in the world or whatever time we would want to have our model be lit in. So I have it, I mean, you can adjust as much as you want. Whoa. But for now, let's just try something here. As an experiment, we're going to go to now. Today, Thursday, we're going to left click. Ooh. That does produce a very dark render. That might not necessarily always be what we want, but we can see that as we shift around in terms of, you know, maybe due to the seasoning or what have you, or as we sort of shift these months around, as you can see, Rhino sort of shifts what it has based on what's there. Now, this might not always be the most appropriate, or might not always produce what you want, which is why personally I still like the option to use manual control, because again, just setting it to 45 and 45 can be really nice. But that part is completely up to you. You know, that's sort of up to your artistic discretion. Now that we've sort of got our sun lit the way that maybe we're happy with, here's what we do next. We're going to move over back to the display tab, and we're going to look at exporting this image, because, you know, eventually this is going to have to make its way onto a page. So we want to actually be able to produce an image with this that we can put in InDesign or wherever we want to use it. So here's what we're going to do. Let's, just for viewing's sake, let's go full screen with this nice rendered image we're creating here. So I'm going to double click this view, parallel, double click. Ooh, it'll take a second for it to crisp back up again. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, now that we've got this nice, you know, ray traced render kind of solidifying before our eyes, we're going to slide over on this display tab to capture viewport to file. Now, this would work for any viewport we wanted, but it's only really useful for right now because this is going to produce a very good, you know, sort of exported visual graphic of what we currently have in front of us here. So let's give it a try. We're going to left click, capture viewport to file, and see there. So it's going to ask us the view we want. And yep, this is in fact the parallel view. Now, any of these things, grid, world axis, C-plane, we're not really too interested in any of that right now. Now, if we want to, we could produce a, we could adjust our viewport and produce a, you know, a higher quality or like a bigger image if we wanted to. But I think for the scope of this project, what is available at the full-size viewport is probably just fine for this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go OK with all of these settings kind of as they are. We're going to go OK. And here's my desktop. We'll just save it there just so that it's nice and quick to access. We'll call this render test 1. That sounds good to me. We're going to hit, well, first, we're going to see what we want to export it as. Personally, JPEG or PNG, either would work fine. JPEG is nice and quick and simple. Let's give that a try. So we're going to hit save. Now we're going to close. And we're going to see what that just did for us. So we're going to double click. Now, here we have essentially the simple but still shadow reflective rendering that we just produced. Now, we're going to save this because naturally this is going to be useful for later, and we'll figure out where to take this into sort of the final deliverable. But for now, you can see creating well-lit renderings in Rhino is quite easily when you have the Raytrace tool.